It's live.
Is it
We're
live?
live.
You can see me now. We exist.
We can.
Okay. I'm so sorry, guys, for the delay. We're here. Can everyone see us and hear us on YouTube? If we're on the homepage, guys, I think everyone needs to go back. So can you all hear us fine? Matt, Sanyin, Jill, we're all fine? Perfect.
I can hear.
Okay, perfect. Look, well, welcome everyone to the first episode of HR Leaders Live. We made it. We're here. It's real. The focus of the show, as you all know, is to really discuss the future of work with today's most innovative and successful people leaders. My name is Chris Rainey. I'm the co-founder of HRD Leaders and the host of the HR Leaders podcast. On today's show, we'll be talking about employee experience. What is it? Who owns it in the business? How can it be measured? And how we can use it as a competitive advantage in our business. Before we get started, let me introduce our co-hosts, Matt Burns, Chief HR Officer over at JYSK.
Morning.
Jill Katz, Group Vice President of HR at Macy's.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
And our special guest today, we're lucky to be joined by Sanyin Siang, CEO, coach and advisor, and the Executive Director of Duke's Cole Leadership and Ethics Center. Sanyin, welcome to the show. How are you?
Excited to be here, Chris.
Well, thank you for agreeing to be our first victim on the show.
Now I'm a little bit nervous.
Well, we made it live. That was the biggest hurdle is overcome. So anything from here on is completely fine. Well, let's jump straight in. Let's kick things off with the question of, what is employee experience? Start with you, Matt.
Well, first off, I think this actually is a great start to our show because I'm usually 13 minutes late for every meeting that I show up for. So in that case, it's a status quo for me, and people that work with me can attest to that. I want to change that question slightly, Chris, which is, what is employee experience? For me, it's what is it not? And one thing I talk a lot about with HR leaders is it's not an event. It's not something you circle on your calendar as a date and say, this is when we're going to talk about employee experience, or this is when we're going to talk about employee engagement. So for me, employee experience starts at the time that you engage a potential applicant for your organization, all the way through to selection, onboarding, orientation, training, and then ongoing development and succession throughout their entire career. The employee experience really is just that, their experience entirely with your organization.
Amazing. Jill?
I love what Matt said. I think the concept of it being a moving, breathing organism is exactly what employee experience is about. And to me, employee experience is really the way that an employee interacts with all the different elements of their career workplace. And so it has everything to do with people. So colleagues, coworkers, vendors, partners, supervisors, direct reports, and then all the way down to things that impact them on a daily basis. So really and truly, technology. Do people have the resources that they need to get their job done easily? The kind of environment they work in, how people like to spend their time, and even how people are treated in personal events. So employee experience really is from the moment you are a candidate and everything that happens in that process through your whole time there impacts your experience there.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. What are your thoughts, Sanyin?
There's a word that I was recently introduced to, and it's called sawubona. And what that word is, the Zulu greeting for I see you. So I think the employee experience is about us letting the employee know that we see them and see them in their entirety, them as human beings and everything, all their talents and gifts and their entire lives, what they have to bring to the table, and being able to translate that in integration with the organization's mission and values and culture, and to build on what Matt and Jill had said. In the past few years, we've seen also, you think about the most important people for an organization, it's our customers and it's really our employees. And on the customer side, we've seen a shift from customer engagement to customer experience and the life cycle, talk about the life cycle of a customer. And I think those, whatever we're thinking about there, we can also translate to the employee experience and thinking about, as Matt and Jill said, the entire life cycle of the employee.
So who owns the employee experience then in the business? Because traditionally it's something which is HR. What are your guys' thoughts on that?
So in my view, I think that everyone owns employee experience. I think that years ago, people probably looked to the HR department to help drive these processes. But employee experience, I love what Sanyin just shared. It really is an authentic thing that comes from within. And so I think every person who is part of a company, regardless of the role they play, management, not management, the first person you see when you walk in the door and the person that helps make the office look beautiful at the end of the day, each person owns a piece of the experience.
Amazing. What are your thoughts, Matt?
I mean, I could say it differently, but it wouldn't be any better than what we just heard. Employee experience, I think I agree. We all own it to some degree. And I think as an organization, it's important that we take feedback from all those various stakeholders when we talk about employee experience, and that we don't limit it to an HR conversation, and we make it a cross-functional discussion that involves all departments, because the needs are different depending on the function you work in. If we have colleagues who work in our finance department, their needs are very unique to our folks in marketing, as an example. So we have to be careful we don't just again treat employee experience as a project or as an initiative, but that we have lots of collaboration, that along with it being an evergreen process from the employee perspective, the development of that from a corporate perspective also needs to be evergreen.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. And one of the things that we brought up in our last conversation, which I wanted to bring up on the show, is the difference between engagement and experience, employee engagement and employee experience. Could you guys delve into that in a bit of detail?
I mean, I'm happy to jump in. We talked about this yesterday, I think it was, Chris.
Yeah.
The way I think, for me, when I hear about employee engagement versus employee experience, engagement is something you do to somebody. Experience is something you do with somebody. So for me, engagement and the tone around that is very clear. Engagement programs to me all feel very contrived, like, hey, we know what you need. Let us tell you what you need, and we're going to put it in a nice little package and then talk about it, for a week every single calendar year. Whereas we talked about the employee experience being not an event and not something that is tied to a particular day on the calendar, and it being kind of an evergreen process. So I would view employee experience really is in that collaborative phase. Are you involving the employee? Are you involving the people in the organization in that conversation? If you're doing that, it's an employee experience. If you're not, and you're hypothesizing what people need and forcing it down the chain, if you will, as a program.
Yeah.
I think the engagement is a subset of the experience, right? Because I think a lot about the word of co-creation, that it's no longer something that comes from the top or from the core out, but it's something where it's co-created. And in order to co-create that experience so that every employee, in owning the employee experience, can express it in a way that is true to who they are, but also in alignment with the mission and the values and the culture of the organization, we have to be able to engage them. We have to be able to be open to listening and hearing their feedback.
Mm-hmm. And should we be measuring employee experience? That's a conversation which has come up quite a lot recently. Or how do we measure employee experience? Should we be measuring experience? What are your thoughts on that, Jill?
And forgive me, it looks like I had a moment of exciting technology a minute ago. So I hope that only impacted me.
Okay.
So I think that I apologize. I think it's an interesting debate whether or not employee experience should be measured. I think I'd argue that employee experience is measured by many of the things that we measure as an organization. So when you start to look at any of the metrics that companies look at regarding their employee population, turnover, retention, high potential development plans. These are all factors that I think connect directly to employee experience. I know there are still lots of companies that actively check in on engagement, and some companies do a large annual engagement survey and they do action planning from there on out. And then there are companies that do sort of a newer progressive model, which is pulse surveys that they check in relatively regularly, maybe with fewer questions. And to me, that is a really good way to literally get a pulse on what's happening in the organization, and then to ask for verbatims from clients and employees on what it is that's driving them, keeping them ticking, and what they want to see changed.
Hmm. I think one of the biggest shifts we've found now in employee engagements is the impact that technology's had. I think that's been the biggest shift we've all seen. Could you share any examples within your own businesses, how you've seen technology affect your organizations, and for yourself, Sanyin, perhaps your clients?
Well, actually, I want to go back to the measurement aspect.
Sure, sure.
One thing that I think is important is in a lot of the employee surveys, it's the questions are framed as how has the company made you happier? You know, what has the company done or the organization done to facilitate your productivity and your experience? And I think building on the theme of ownership by everyone, some of those questions it would be better served for the survey for those questions to also shift to what have you done to make yourself happier? What have you done? Because at the end of the day, that ownership isn't only the organization's, it's everybody's. You know? And so that's one thing I see missing in a lot of employee experience surveys that I would urge for the HR leaders out there to place in there.
And I think that's another way of saying the same thing we've just said, which is, and I do want to go back to the measurement piece. So I'll be a bit more explicit. I don't think you have a choice. I think you have to measure it. So if you don't measure it and you try and approach this like a qualitative conversation, you're just not going to get buy-in throughout the organization when it comes time to talk about resources and funding and finite amount of time that you have to focus on various initiatives. So if you don't quantify that, don't be surprised if when it comes time to talk about budget, you're left out in the dark. And that's a failure of your inability to sell and position that within your business. And I think we need to focus more on that from an HR perspective. On the second piece, I could not agree more with what Sanyin's saying. My research, having administered employee surveys for the better part of 10 years, tells me that one strong correlation between employee engagement and their relationship with the organization is actually their friendships at work. And that is not the responsibility of the organization. That's the responsibility of everybody else in the organization. So to Sanyin's point, those bonds, if they become strong, and if you take that seriously with your coworkers, you actually, as yourself, as an employee, as an individual contributor, can have a real strong impact on employee engagement.
I think that was, even for me personally, when I was deciding to leave the business, that was the hardest thing. It wasn't about the business, it wasn't about being a manager or the products or anything in business. It was leaving my team and the strong bonds that I had with everyone, people that I've been, working with for over 10 years, have gone through the journey with me. You build that bond. And that was the hardest thing for me. And that's also what kept me there, right? Talking about engagement and retention of employees. What kept me within that business for 10 years, from 17 to 27, wasn't the business. It was actually my team. It was the environment. It was everyone around me that I loved coming to work. And when I moved into the next business, I realized how important that was. I was like, wow, I don't have anything. I'm sort of back to zero. And then I had to sort of build those relationships again for my own experience to be better. So I purposely built those relationships to make my work experience a lot better than actually just turning up to work and doing the job every day. So
well, Chris, now you have us.
Oh no, I've gone back a step. I'm joking. I love you guys. Look at Sanyin's face. I literally lost like 10 people watching right now just from that one comment.
I think Matt makes a really good point there regarding friendships. I think that it is such an obvious and such an important component of work. And there is a tremendous amount of research that ties friendships to very important metrics like productivity and absenteeism and health and wellness and safety and shrinkage. There's so many ways that having strong relationships at work really do truly impact the bottom line pretty directly. And yet I think 5-10 years ago, talking about friendships at work felt like, that church and state thing. And today I think the blend is just, it's everywhere. It impacts everything that we do. And, I'm here because of my friendship with you.
Can we dwell on that point a little bit more? Because,
sure.
I know all of us here also care about culture. That's a word, culture, as Peter Drucker says, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Mm-hmm. And that part of that culture is also the environment. So when we talk about, training our employees and shoring up their skill sets, we're focused on specific, things are in the classroom. But how often are we also thinking about how do we create the environment to facilitate those friendships, to facilitate, it's the intangibles, right? And then how do we measure the effectiveness of that. It's less of a first order effect. It's second and third order, but nevertheless, in an interdependent, complex nature that's our organizations, those effects are critical. So Matt and Jill, I'm deeply curious to hear, how do you guys create the environment that can foster that communal, that shared sense, collective consciousness, if you will?
You say the toughest questions for us, don't you, Sanyin?
Don't ask me that question.
No, I'm curious. I think I would love to hear what you guys are doing and thinking.
So let me offer this. This is my way of half answering your question. How's that? I just got back from Mexico City, and I spent 3 weeks down there for a number of reasons. First, I was doing my MBA program. And secondly, I spent a few extra days while I was down in Mexico City filming a documentary on workplace culture. And for me, it was an opportunity to understand some of the secret sauce, if you will, that exists in Latin America, and potentially bring some of those best practices to things that I'm doing in North America. And as somebody who's worked around the globe, like yourself as well, you know that there are best practices hidden in all sorts of unique and cool places. But a lot of times we can focus on what we know in day in, day out in our own immediate environments. And one thing that I would say in terms of Latin America is they have figured out relationships, both on a personal perspective, but also in a workplace perspective. So when I talk to people in those markets, that church and state that Jill mentioned is very, very blurred. It's actually an expectation that you form relationships at work, because if you don't, then you actually aren't fitting into that organizational culture. So it was interesting to see that. And I talked to organizations that were also founded in Mexico and have Mexican leadership, but also international, multinational corporations. And I was curious to see if it changed anything if the company was from the UK or Germany or the United States. And actually what happened was an interesting dynamic where it was almost like, in terms of culture, it's almost a collision of two cultures, the domestic culture in which they're operating, but also the corporate culture in which the organization is kind of from. But ultimately, what won out was relationships. So for me, that was a really interesting dynamic. And I think that as I pursue my career going forward, I'll place a greater premium on creating a workplace that allows for the forming of friendships. So you create the environment and then you get out of the way. I think a lot of times, and the mistakes I may have made in my past would be I was trying to engineer a result that I thought people wanted. And I think that was a failure in my approach. What actually should be happening is you should create the circumstances and the environment for that to exist, and then you just back off and stay out of the way.
And on that community piece, I mean, one of the hot terms right now is resilient. How do we create a resilient organization? And resilience actually isn't not only an individual thing, it's actually a community thing. We are more resilient if we have a community or a team. And Jill, like the environment, I'm curious to see how at Macy's you're creating that environment to foster the community and so people actually feel the culture.
They have lovely pictures of polar bears in the office. Is that right? Right behind you.
Well, I want to start out by thanking Matt for his half answer and just curious, if that's a half answer, I would be very, very interested to sign in someday for a full answer.
It's only half an hour show, Jill.
That was fantastic, and I love what Matt's doing and what he shared, and it is worthwhile. I think that his documentary is really interesting and worth checking out and just watching. I think there's great stuff there. For me, I think that a really big piece of this is about listening and asking, and I think one of the don't do's. I think what you do oftentimes can be a good example of the opposite of what you don't do. I think companies that are asking and then not taking action are the ones who aren't seeing the results that they want. So I think that it is very common for companies to be doing surveys or focus groups or having one-on-ones or whatever the forum might be to gather information on creating an engaging environment or a benefited employee experience. But companies who spend a lot of time, money, investment asking, and then do nothing or very, very little or sort of a pro forma response to the questions, that's where I think this drops off. So to me, facilitating the conversation, but really and truly listening to what you're hearing from your employees and actually taking action on it is a very, very critical piece. The other thing that I've tried to focus on myself, and I've also done a lot of reading on it, is the focus on all levels is so important. the more junior levels of the organization, these are our future leaders, and they are oftentimes more likely to share authentic, scrappy responses and feedback, and that is what we need to be listening to. So, those to me are some important points. At Macy's, I'm really proud that we have shifted in a lot of ways from big annual moments, for example, an annual review once a year, an annual engagement survey once a year, to more regular check-ins on performance, on engagement, so that we can constantly be taking the temperature of the organization and hopefully listening and responding in the moment to things that need to be fixed.
Amazing. Well, anyone else want to add anything to that topic?
If you're going to ask for feedback and you don't have any real intentions to action it, then you're making a huge mistake.
It makes it worse, right? It makes it worse because everyone's expecting, you've asked me these questions, you've asked for my opinion, and then nothing happens. And what you find is the same survey comes out a year later with the same questions, with the same things. And then everyone looks around, and especially where we're in a connected world now where everyone can share information and talk to each other. And everyone's like, well, everyone clearly shares the same agreement and no one's done anything about it. And I think it works against you. Basically what you've just said, Matt.
It works against you in that instance. It also works against you for any future change effort that you want to put in your organization, because now you're at a deficit. People don't believe what you're going to say. They don't trust you're going to follow through with it. So actually the next 2 or 3 times, if not longer, you may have to do some reclamation with regards to your culture. Not only are you having to fix that one incident, but also multiple incidents. So I'm sincere about this. I tell my team the same thing. If you don't want the answer, don't ask the question, because you set an expectation that you're going to solve it. And in some cases, it may not be possible. The second thing I would say is I think people sometimes are afraid to ask the question because they're uncertain about the response. There's nothing wrong with telling an employee base, whether it's a small group or a large organization, that what you've asked for, we just simply can't do. So every single survey I've been part of, compensation is on the list. It may not be number 1 or 2, but maybe it's 4 or 5 or 6. And the reality is we're not going to go based on that survey and give everyone a 50% pay increase. But what we can do is talk a bit about compensation in the broader context, and we can let them know what we are going to do and not going to do. And I think people respect the transparency. They may not like the message up front, but they respect the fact that you had the guts to respond to it and give it a thoughtful response. And then that way, that builds trust going forward, I think.
I think you said a magic word there. That's trust, right? Because at the heart of every leader, follower, and I don't mean leadership as in position of power, it's influence. Whether it's the relationship between us and our customers, us and our employees, trust is at the heart of it. And I love what you just said about transparency. It's putting it into context, responding and saying, all right, this may not be what you want to hear, but here's the reason why we can't do this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Perfect. I do want to actually get your thoughts on the technology piece, if I may, because I think that's something which is huge right now, and I'm seeing it more and more now with the conversation I have. How have you seen, technology impact the workplace within your organizations and with the companies that you work with, Sanyin?
I think technology is a double-edged sword, right? It goes back to intentionality. How do you intend to use the technology? It can facilitate, and it can also be a distraction. That goes back to knowing the outcomes. I mean, a wonderful way that can facilitate. Look, Chris, you're in the UK, Matt's in Vancouver, Jill, you and I are on the East Coast, and we're all together. This is facilitated by technology. We have never met in person, but there's already a shared sense of community and trust. I'm hoping you'll include me as one of your friends now. In this wonderful organization that's called HR Leaders. And so that's a wonderful way that technology can amplify. Where it can distract is if you're not careful, it can eat up all of your time. Right? So it goes back to intentionality.
Matt?
It's a question I get a lot as well. I mean, I put on my profile, I broadcast that our organization was, fortunate enough to win the most innovative use of technology. So I think people assume that means that all we do is technology. I'll be honest, this is the honest answer. The reason we put technology in place was we wanted to remove the administrative, manual, low value tasks for our department so they could focus their time on the human interaction. So most HR leaders and at least the ones I talked to, they started in this line of work because they wanted to help people, they wanted to engage people, and they wanted that human interaction. no one joined HR because they wanted to sit behind spreadsheets for 7 or 8 hours every single day. So what we've done is, by automating the work, we've facilitated them to get engaged with employees. And I think, to your earlier point, Sandy, I think it is a double-edged sword. I think a lot of times we will be chasing technology in the spirit of trying to realize efficiencies. And I think about, applicant tracking systems as a great example of that. We've tried to introduce efficiencies to make it easier for applicants to apply and for HR teams to sift through thousands of applications. But the result of it is it becomes a very impersonal and very cold process.
Yeah.
So you have to be careful that you don't over leverage technology in the pursuit of efficiency at the expense of the human experience. I ultimately think the companies and the organizations that have the most success going forward are the ones that find that balance between kind of humanity and efficiency. And that's something that we struggle with every single day. We haven't figured out the formula in our organization, but it's something we're constantly chipping away at to see if we can find that appropriate balance.
Wasn't you doing something around videos, Matt, in terms of your employment? Because that, for me, was really, because right now everyone consumes content via video, right? And didn't you say that you were shifting some of your recruitment efforts to have video?
If folks want to go on my LinkedIn profile, you'll see about 10 weeks ago, I posted a job actually on my team for a change management specialist. And our recruitment efforts had gone very well, but I really wanted applicants to understand a bit more about the organization and a bit more about me. And the best way to do that was communicate via video. So all we did was simply take a job posting, post it on LinkedIn, and then I included a 3-minute video on who we are, what we're all about. Like, it sounds really, really simple. By the way, the budget on that?
Zero. Exactly.
And the responses that I received were unbelievable. I mean, I think the penetration was close to 25,000 views, which for someone with my LinkedIn profile is a significant amount of views on a video. And on top of that, I met applicants that I wouldn't have otherwise met who got shared the content from people in my sphere of influence. And I met with people that I wouldn't have otherwise had a chance to connect with. And ultimately, I think we're going to find a great candidate because we were able to take that post viral. So I think, to your point, Chris, you can introduce levels of humanity into your process and make it more accessible. And actually, the sad thing is that becomes a differentiator in today's reality.
I know, and as you said, there's zero cost. I'm speaking to companies that are spending millions and millions of pounds in terms of on their recruitment, when you could actually take that job spec, turn it into a video. Am I more likely to read a long job spec with just loads of information, which is very generic, or am I going to watch a 2-minute video?
Well, if it's me,
I'll read the job spec if it's yours video, Matt. What about you, Jill?
Well, the first thing I was just going to say, this might not be the right time, but Matt, I applied for that job and I haven't heard back yet.
I have no response to that.
No, I actually think that's a fantastic idea. And it actually ties back to what we talked about a little bit earlier with friendships and relationships. When people can actually see and hear and get the sense of what it's like to work with these people, that is a huge selling factor, assuming it's a sell. So I think that's terrific. I don't have anything really specifically different to add. What Matt just talked about is a great example. At Macy's, we've been going through the exact same thing of really sort of augmenting our system side so that a lot of the administrative tasks that HR people manage on a daily basis are moved to an automated system and actually put a lot of the power back into the hands of the organization and let people use self-service. What's interesting for me is it puts more onus on people leaders and fewer HR leaders in the organization to actually have far more targeted, strategic relationship building skills. So where some people were able to get in with clients by administering and transacting quickly, what I think it does is it puts more pressure and creates more opportunity for great HR people to get in with their business partners and really talk to them now about the business, because the other stuff that comes up when you only have an hour is off the plate. So I see it as a great opportunity, and I'm excited about it myself.
Mm-hmm. What about outside of the? Oh, go on, Sanyin. Apologies.
I was going to say, and to build on that, what Matt and Jill had said, at the end of the day, when people make decisions, whether it's a purchasing decision or whether they decide to join a company or buy a service or a product, it's a gut decision, right? And then they use the behavioral science tells us that, and then they rationalize that gut decision afterwards. And so with technology, we're able I think about storytelling quite a bit because stories puts data into a context that's emotionally resonant. Technology enables a multifactorial nuances to come into play in the telling of that story beyond just words of what you see on the page. I mean, as what Matt did on his video, for hiring video, now people are able to sense who he and his team are, or what Joe is talking about with our leaders and their decision making. They're able to now understand the fuller context through the story that's facilitated via technology.
Great. And while we're talking, guys, people that are listening, and there's 30 of you listening right now. What are your thoughts? Leave your thoughts in the comments section on YouTube. Let us know what your thoughts are, what you're doing in the business, whether you disagree with all of Matt's points. Let us know. We're happy to answer the questions from you guys, so feel free to drop them in the comment section. For me, one of the things that I realized is when we talk about employee experience, just outside of HR, not just within HR, because we've spoken a lot about employee experience specifically within HR. Outside of that is small steps that organizations that are taken to make their trend. I always think about my own experience as a leader of this business and how can I bring that in all the time. That's all I'm thinking about. Hence why I'm wearing a t-shirt. I spent the first 13 years of my career in a 3-piece suit with a handkerchief and a tie. And there was no real rational reason why that I was wearing that. And I was much more comfortable. And my team all of a sudden on a dress down Friday was much more productive. Because they felt comfortable. They're in their own clothes. They walk into the office feeling, they're wearing their favorite t-shirt. So all of a sudden it brings in a bit more energy into the office. Something as small as a dress down Friday, our productivity went up through the roof just because of that one piece of a sort of employee experience that they had. Also, as a manager, one thing I wanted to get your thoughts on is I was always trained not to be friends with my team. So the first 5 years of my thing is you're the manager, separate being a manager from a friend because you're too friendly, Chris, with your team, your colleagues. You shouldn't be going to the gym with them after work. You shouldn't be going out for a run at lunchtime because I had a very close relationship with the team. And I was always told the opposite. And I never understood that because I clearly didn't listen because my team ended up being some of my best friends. My business partner actually is one of my colleagues who actually ended up being the best man at my wedding. So that just tells you how strong that relationship was inside and outside the workplace. But so many businesses now, and even friends of mine that are directors of global organizations, are told to separate being a manager and a director versus and not be a friend to the team. I'm just wondering what your thoughts on that. Just want to throw that in there.
All right. So I just have one perspective. At the end of the day, people don't follow positions or titles. People follow human beings. So be a human being.
It seems so obvious, doesn't it? But so many businesses that I see out there. Do you find that in your own businesses? Like maybe it's just my organization that I worked in. Was this separation between management and employee?
I think that there's a big difference between the word manager and leader. I think that a manager is a person who literally helps other people manage work and gives direction and instruction and feedback and legitimately takes care of and maintains work that people are doing. I think a leader is a person whose job it is to move obstacles out of the way so that other people can find success. I personally have never loved my experiences when I had managers. I have always felt much more inspired by people who create ways to empower me and help move obstacles out of my way and let me feel like I am accomplishing and doing my best. And so as a leader myself, I have been passionate about trying my very best to be a leader and not a manager. Most of the people we're working with are grown-ups, and not all, just
I like the way you said most. I like the way you said
and so they don't need to be managed. They know what they need to do. Our job is to help them do it in a way that makes them feel incredible. So that's my thought there.
At the expense of pouring a large bucket of cold water on this conversation, I'm going to add maybe a different take on this. I think, I think it's important that we talk about not having a clear separation between work and personal life. Having said that, I think it's incumbent upon leaders to demonstrate some judgment in doing that. And I think a lot of the reason why organizations, and I've been guilty of this myself, I have counseled leaders for the better part of 15 years to watch out about that separation, because I think you can take that too far. And I think you can create some issues, not maliciously, but I just think by extension of what you've talked about. So I'll give you an example. If you have a team of 10, and within that 10, you're going to have various people on the team that you affiliate with more because there's a closer synergy, maybe a shared background or a shared worldview, and you're going to naturally gravitate towards those individuals. That will come at the expense of the individuals that maybe you don't share as much in common with. As a leader, I think it's absolutely fine to consider engaging your employees in a personal context, but you have to give equal opportunities to your entire team. Otherwise, you actually can fragment your team by creating inequity. Because make no mistake about it, when you're a leader, your time is currency in the workplace. And that was a tough message for me to understand, because I don't view my time as currency in that context. But for people that may work with you, they view it as an opportunity to get perspective or get advice or get feedback. And for them, it's valuable. So if you're not spreading that time, or at least given the opportunity to spread that time around equally, you're going to create issues. So I think I agree with what Sanyin and Jill are saying. I just say we would proceed with caution. And there are lines. So there are some things that I don't think you should discuss with your employees, especially things of particularly a personal nature. And when I say personal, I mean things that you talk about with your spouse or with your immediate family may not be the appropriate topic in the workplace. But I think that where we've gotten to actually is we're managing almost like in a litigative process where we're so afraid of making a mistake that we just over subscribe to, I only want to talk to you in a formal meeting. And I think that is also a mistake. So I think it's, again, finding that balance between, that keeping things rigid, but at the same time, keeping things open and accessible to your colleagues in your business.
Mm-hmm.
Very wise.
Yeah. Anyone on YouTube have any thoughts on this on the live stream? We'll wait for you guys to throw some comments. So we're always going to move on to the live Q&A, guys. But I think you guys have answered everyone's questions, unfortunately, that they had already within the chat, which is probably a good thing. One of the things that I did want to ask you guys as well is we spoke before about the link between employee experience brand versus customer experience brand and how they intertwine. Could you share your thoughts on that?
It's the same thing. So I was having this chat actually with an HR leader the other day, and he's been in the business for the better part of 25 years, have had a lot of experience with multinational corporations, and now is spending most of his time working on boards. And we had this conversation exactly like this, which is we're seeing a lot more blending between marketing and HR because the skill sets are incredibly similar and the purpose is incredibly similar. In fact, if your corporate messaging is different than your internal employment brand messaging, then you're not being genuine. So in a lot of ways, that information should be exactly the same. In addition, those two functions rely a lot on now data to try and supplement qualitative information. It's just as intangible to talk about the customer experience as it is about the employment experience. So I think those functions have a lot of commonalities in terms of some of their challenges in achieving relevance and in terms of achieving success in the organization. So I think that HR professionals are best served to have really strong partnerships with their marketing teams so that your internal messaging is mirror to what's being said about your organization externally, or you're going to risk that perception of misalignment.
Yeah. Well, it goes back to your point of the video earlier. That's something you could collaborate on with the marketing to understand. Some of the marketing directors when I've done the podcast, I've got emails from the marketing department of those businesses saying, "Hi, Chris, can I use your podcast in our branding piece to help promote this leader within our organization and get the message out to the audience?" I was like, wow, okay. You want to include that. And then all of a sudden it really brought the profile and it helped that leader deliver the message to a broader audience just by coming on the podcast through that collaboration with marketing.
One thing marketing has to get over, and it's the same thing HR has to get over, which is the days of having to have very curated, professional looking content.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you will get much more success with an iPhone jammed in front of your face, talking real to actual people than you will with some 50,000 production where you have a makeup team and a film crew and the whole situation. Mm-hmm. So I think, for marketers and for HR professionals, just be real. Whether your audience is customers, whether your audience is employees, that real sells today. Yeah. Inauthentic does not sell.
Yeah. And as you said as well, you can produce a lot more of that. You can keep pushing it out. It doesn't need to be flashy. You don't need to spend 3 months developing it. You can just it always drives me crazy when I see recruiters online on LinkedIn just doing these posts with these just long list of job specs, and it's just like, just post a quick video. All of us post on LinkedIn, right? Sanyin, one of the things that I love about what you do is you just pick up the iPhone, you grab your guest, and you're just like, tell us something. Tell us a bit more about what you do. And it's incredible because it's real. People buy that. I want to see that. I don't want to see it all edited and things popping up. And I just, and it's in the moment. You can tell it's in the moment as well. So,
and thank you for highlighting that, Chris, because the feeling I want the viewers to feel is as if they were walking down the street with me, and then we come upon this leader, and boom, what are they, what are they thinking? What are they saying? And on the customer experience and the employee experience, the brand consistency and authenticity are so key. I couldn't agree more. Of that mission, it's the expression of those in the consumer context versus the employee context that may be different, but at the end of the day, mission, values, culture has to be consistent.
And again, talking about experience, that's exactly how they communicate with their friends and family. You know, in that same format, in that same, it's so natural to now. In the past, it would have been weird to see that, but now it's actually strange to watch a produced video. For me, I actually see it and I click play and I'm like, oh. Whereas if I see someone with if I see the the thumbnail with someone doing a selfie with someone there, I'm actually much more likely to click that and consume the content because my friend sends me one, Shane sends me one, we send each other messages that way. So it goes back to how people consume content. As well, which is one of the reasons why we're live streaming to YouTube today, and not creating a webinar where you have to sign up and send all the details in, because that's not how people consume content. Well, look, I think that's all for today, guys. I think our half an hour discussion went a little bit longer than we thought it would be. So thank you, Matt. Thank you, Jill. Thank you, Sanyin. I really appreciate you taking the time to share your experience and knowledge with our listeners. Thank you to all of you as well. I actually got a question from Jared Robbie, who just thrown in at the last minute. What has he said? You spoke about leveraging technologies to rid your organizations of manual processes, ultimately increasing the employee engagement by giving HR more time to focus on the human interactions. Has this resulted in a notable increase in employee retention for you guys?
It has for us. So I would say it's a lagging measure because, of course, the investment you make in the human interaction doesn't lead to an immediate result. So what it's done is two things. One, I think it's improved the amount of engagement that our team has with the broader business, which has ultimately enhanced our brand. I think previously HR had a brand of we only come when we have to come, and generally those aren't necessarily for positive circumstances. But now that we have more time, it's kind of like, you're here again? And it's like, yeah, we're here again because we want to see how things are going proactively. So it's changed the dynamic of what we've been able to focus on. I'll also say, second thing is it's allowed us to focus on more strategic initiatives. Like, for instance, we're focusing right now on predictive analytics, something we never would have had time to do if we're spending all of our time behind managing spreadsheets. So I think as important as it is to introduce technology to give you those efficiencies, it's negotiating with your organization how you're going to spend that found time. So they don't just say, thanks for the resources, we're going to take those back.
Yeah.
I want to keep my resources, and here's how I'm going to leverage them going forward. So I think that's another important aspect in amongst that idea.
Fantastic. Well, look, thank you all for tuning in. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe on YouTube. Hit the little bell icon as well, which will help you to be notified next time we go live. I promise next week we'll be live on time as well. I'll make sure our CTO helps us out to make sure that happens.
I'm all over it.
Also, please leave a comment okay, I've got another question. Last question, Martin, I promise, and I have to let everyone go. How much automation have you achieved, Matt?
We are 94% paperless. We will be paperless within the next 45 days. So
wow. Okay.
A lot.
A lot. There you go, Martin. Hope that answered your question. Guys, also, one of the things that I'm interested in hearing, please leave your comment in the comments, letting us know what topics you'd like us to cover on the show. And we'll go through that and we'll choose the most recommended topics as the next discussion topic for next week.
And find us on LinkedIn by all means. I mean, this doesn't have to end. This can keep going. So just find us on LinkedIn, send us a message.
I am going to link up all of the details for all of our amazing guests today in the description, so you guys can go back, get in contact with them as well. Apart from that, thank you for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you all next week.
Awesome.
Thank